Greetings, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 64, with Ryan Catherwood, a fellow higher ed podcaster who also works in alumni engagement over at Longwood University. So really appreciate the time to catch up with Ryan as a fellow member of the ConnectEDU Podcast Network. I think he might be the last person part of that group that I've had to kind of nail down to have a conversation with. So I'm really glad that we were able to get this scheduled. So really appreciate Ryan sharing pretty much kind of all of his professional story, going from working in hospitality and working summers in a pizza kitchen to his current role, where he's gotten to do some really cool things with his own podcast as well as a podcast with his institution. So that's how I found and got to know Ryan originally, and just really glad I get to know him a little bit better and share our conversation with everyone. So definitely connect with him and all that we discussed in this episode down in the show notes. And thank you so much for listening. And without further ado, this is episode number 64 with Ryan Catherwood. I really appreciate you taking time out for the podcast here, Ryan, as a fellow podcaster. Always nice to kind of sit down and chat about I think, that part of your journey, but then everything else, because sometimes that's like, the thing that I know most about anybody, but it's obviously they've done a lot of other cool things too. So, we'll start there if you want to do kind of your brief introduction and an overview of your professional journey and how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, Dustin, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. From one podcaster to another, I certainly appreciate it. I've been in the higher ed space for a little while now, having roots really in the hospitality industry. All my background when I was a kid and then into my 20s was in food and beverage. I waited tables, worked every position in a restaurant. I married that up with a major in communications when I was in college at the University of Richmond, and really it kind of the combination of that communications degree, the hospitality business, and then eventually really a passion towards marketing and communications work as a professional kind of guided me into this interesting career in alumni engagement, career services. I never really imagined myself working in this particular type of role, and I don't think a lot of people do who end up being in alumni engagement. When they're back in college and trying to sort things out. But really my career as it is now is kind of a manifestation, like it is for lots of people, of the things that I did along the way and how they sort of amassed to create some sort of strategic direction for what I'm doing now.
Yeah, because I guess to me it seems there maybe would be other like natural pathway, because it's like people aren't like, oh yeah, for anything in higher ed, like, oh, I want to go to be, like a director of career services or something. But like the path you went of like communications and marketing and, just getting a message out there and like building community and all that. Like when I was like looking through your LinkedIn, it's like that, it felt like a very natural pathway, I guess, of just like, that would seem to be a way that people would get into alumni engagement. The only other thing I could think of is just like, if you're in like kind of like sales or like business development, because it's like if you are working with like donors to try to like fund something, you kind of have to like sell them on that. But at least for, I think what resonates with me more so coming up through like residence life and different like programming and stuff is that idea of, and I know it's a big focus for you, like community building and stuff. So as there's seeing like that pathway that you took. And I guess the other sort of nonsensical like question that I had, it just popped in my head, so I feel like I have to ask it, because like it sounds like being coming up like through the service industry, like that was like your foundation, like where you got started and everything. Do you have an opinion on like the classic question of like, do you think everybody should be a server? Like, do you feel like it gave you like really valuable skills and stuff like that? Like, is it something that you still think about today?
Absolutely. And I think, hospitality industry is great for a number of reasons. The first is it does, as you say, provide you a sense of what's going on in a restaurant when you go there on a Saturday night and it's really busy, and you understand that it's the same number of people cooking in the kitchen on Saturday night as it is on Tuesday night. And you just have a better sense as to how things are going and the challenges that all the staff face. And you just end up being more gracious, I think, to wait staff. But I also think along the way, it's provided me that professional background to get a job in a pinch. I was let go from a job. I guess it was about 11 years ago now. And I was able, because of that restaurant background, to immediately get a job almost in a day, right? Just to be able to fall back on that work, because there's always restaurants looking for staff almost at any given time. And so I tell college students that not only can it be a great foundation to your career, but boy, it's a great insurance policy to have if you should be struggling to find a job. And thirdly, there's a lot of college students that graduate and they don't really know what they want to do, and they haven't secured a job or an internship. And so restaurant work, hospitality work, you can do it nights and weekends and then engage in some sort of a low paying or even unpaid job or internship just to get some experience. So that working when other people aren't allows you for that opportunity to gain some professional experience. So I think it's really valuable in lots of ways.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, just like working with people and a lot of different kind of people, and just all that stuff. I mean, that's really good advice. And I guess to clarify, it sort of segues to my next question. Like, were you doing that when you were in college? And maybe I don't know if that's part of what sort of is like kind of pivotal, like formative moments from your college experience, but I always like to hear anything specifically, like a memory or like a mentor or something from like when you were an undergrad that you feel like is still resonant for you today.
Right. Well, certainly during my college summers, I was doing restaurant work. I remember working at the New Jersey Shore in an Italian restaurant called Tritty Joe's, and I was the oven guy. It was a pizza place, and so I was night after night like shoveling pizzas and strombolis and garlic bread in and out of ovens and just sweating my butt off. And it was not very much fun, but boy, do you have a good sense of how kitchens work, timing those orders to go with all the other things on the ticket and that sort of thing. But also when I was on campus at the University of Richmond, I worked at what was called the Cellar. It's still called the Cellar, actually, and it's an on-campus restaurant, sort of brew pub, where I worked as a bartender and in the kitchen too. And they had basically everybody worked every position in the restaurant, and that was great. It was a really positive experience. I worked with my friends, and I engaged in restaurant work right out of college too. So it's sort of provided, without question, a really strong sort of foundation as to how I started to launch professionally.
And did you, I guess then, in addition to that, did you also do anything on campus, like when you were, that sort of like turned you on to like higher ed specifically? Or I guess maybe that's like the next like connective tissue of how you sort of like parlayed and eventually like kind of committed to working towards like a career in higher ed and kind of marketing and alumni engagement, all those sort of things.
Right. Yeah. So I did do a number of things. I was a resident assistant for a couple of years. I remember I was placed to be the RA in our academic dorm, and I was probably the only guy that was not probably suited by grade point average to live in the academic dorm. But they must have thought it would be better for me to have the quiet kids, the non-troublesome kids. So that was fantastic. That was a great experience being an RA in the academic dorm at Richmond. And then I was also in a fraternity, so I was engaged in Greek life and had a couple of leadership positions in the fraternity. And then the thing that really stuck out as one of my most favorite things that I did is Richmond has a speech center. Mm-hmm. So you would go there and, as a student, you'd practice your presentations. And I was a speech center consultant. So you actually had to take a theory and pedagogy class in order to get, trained to be a student consultant. And I did that. And so I was paid, a little bit to help students develop their presentations. That, and I did I was the instructor for the 100 level public speaking lab. So I really sort of immersed myself in my major. I originally started as an English major, and I very quickly realized I hated the books that the professors were asking me to read, but I was pretty good at getting up and talking about them. So I switched. I fortunately attended a career fair, or a majors fair, I should say, at just the right time, and then switched to communications with a concentration in rhetoric, and that was really a great fit for me.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like like a practical application of like, I don't know, like it's the idea of like language and like stories or something. It's like, well, get into like a practical application of like, how do you convey idea? Like kind of get into that sort of reality of, language and those sort of things. But yeah, I mean, you definitely kept busy with all that stuff and like working in the summers and stuff like that, which is awesome. And I think now, I mean, that kind of brings us up towards even, I guess, broadly sort of like your current work that you've been doing for several years, throughout, different positions and stuff like that. But so I guess I always like to hear kind of going through things sort of chronologically there, but like just broadly, like with this type of work that you've been doing for several years, like what do you enjoy most about it? Like what's keeping you really engaged? What's keeping you excited? And I know part of it, I don't know if it does kind of factor in of like you've been able to do pretty creative things like doing the Hired Live stuff, and you're on podcast and I guess multiple like I know where you're at now, Longwood, you do a podcast with them, and then Advancement Legends as well. So I don't know if it's just that ability to do like a lot of different things or just anything else, I guess, that comes to mind of like what keeps you excited about your current work now.
Well, I can trace it back really to going to graduate school in Australia. I was kind of fizzling out on the hospitality. I worked in a couple of hotels. So I switched sort of from food and beverage to sales and marketing in hotels, and then realized, I kind of like the sales and marketing thing, but I don't really want to do it in hotels anymore. So I went to graduate school in Australia and at the University of Queensland. And for anybody out there who's wondering who might be in their sort of mid to late 20s, who may be thinking about some sort of really amazing worldly experience, Australia graduate school was just tremendous. But I got an internship in the business school's marketing office. So it was at that point that I was offered the chance to conduct some research on the strength of the brand of the University of Queensland Business School. And that just got me really fascinated by the idea of value perception and core values and personality traits of organizations. And it was really from there that my trajectory into this line of work began. I remember when I got a job at Washington and Lee University in the alumni office as the digital communications specialist, where it's mostly registration forms, emails, social media, website management. And I just decided at that point I was going to be all in on this alumni engagement space. I remember Googling for advice, and there just wasn't a ton of it out there. There was just a couple of people that were blogging, Andy Shanlin and his blog Alumni Futures, and a few other things that were out there. And I was just like, wow, there's really kind of a space here that I could help fill by adding content, whether it's articles, podcasts, other forms of sort of thought leadership that I thought that I could help the space move forward because I was really into it, and I thought it was really fun. I still feel lucky to have found such a fun area of work, and so all those things kind of built upon itself. But there were a couple of sort of profound, just go after it type of decisions there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, just because I think there are sometimes those like decision points or just like you kind of trace back where it's like, that's kind of like where everything started like clicking into place, like, and I think for me, also many times for other people, like if it's maybe that first like involvement opportunity when you're in undergrad of being like an orientation leader or a tour guide or like, because also for me, like I was just like tapped on the shoulder and they're like, I think you would be good for this. And I was like, oh my God, like I never even considered, but if you think I would be like, and then that's what I was like, oh, this is what I was looking for. I want to work in the education space. Thought I wanted to be like a high school history teacher, but it just felt a lot more right because I was growing and learning so much in college. I was like, I would love to be able to kind of nurture that experience for other people, but it's like that was it. Like that was and like for at least where it's like that's where things like started to change. Like you're really refining and focusing like what you were doing and finding kind of spaces where you just were building kind of a professional network and community and doing work that you're really excited about. So, and I guess because we're on a higher ed podcast and I'm really curious about it specifically, like how did your sort of like, foray into the podcasting world start? And like, cause I know like I've always been a fan. So I was, very grateful initially for the opportunity to do kind of formally a podcast with the Student Affairs Collective first, and that, you know, now I'm kind of hooked and very much in it, and like working and kind of talking with other higher ed podcasters. But yeah, like how did you get into it initially?
Well, I mean, I guess in part it was it began when I was offered the chance to host episodes of Advancement Live on the Higher Ed Live sort of network of shows, because they did convert those Google Hangouts based interviews into podcasts. Right. And so I suppose that was the original. But when I got the job at Longwood, I was living in Charlottesville, and that's about 75 minutes from driveway to desk. And so I was spending an awful lot of time in the car. And like most podcast people, I started with Serial, right? And but then it was This American Life, and then it was Snap Judgment. And while I liked a lot of podcasts, when I really liked the story-based podcasts, so a central theme, stories underneath that theme that answer a question or sort of tap dance around a question. And I thought, wow, it would be really fun to try to create something like this for Longwood. And so we created the Day After Graduation podcast, and I learned a ton about how to do that. And I can say, and I get a lot of calls from people asking to talk about how we did that. And it was the most difficult thing that I've ever done. I did not have a sense of the challenge of forensic interviewing and making sure the audio quality was up top notch, and the sound design and engineering, and I had to find the help for that. And so it was definitely the most challenging, but also the most rewarding thing I've ever done professionally, to sort of tell those stories of getting started in the world after graduation. We're a merged alumni and career team at Longwood. And I thought that a podcast around those sort of the pitfalls and successes of getting started would be an interesting angle. And then the Advancement Legends podcast, I just thought, I thought there's a good number of people, having reached out to them over the years for Advancement Live or just professional network building through CASE, that would sit down or go over Skype for an interview, some senior level leaders in the advancement space. And I learned so much from all those interviews. I guess I did about 36 episodes over 2 seasons, and certainly not ruling out more, but that was an incredible experience over the last few years.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, yeah, and I think there's value in, like, I've taken some breaks, and I'm thinking of like maybe like winding down season lengths, because I've done like every single week of the entire calendar year, and that's tough when there's just any other demands. And then it's like, okay, now I'm trying to do like bi-weekly, and then I'm like, you know what, like I can like maybe to kind of just like put it to rest over like the holidays, and then come back afterward. Like I'll sometimes be like, I gotta go right up until like the week before Christmas or something like that, because I think recognizing how much it's important, like the energy and the enthusiasm that this, it's a decent time commitment takes, and it's just this sort of side project I have to fit in when I can. So I've known a lot of people where they kind of like step away or take a break or just change their like posting schedule and stuff like that, because I think it can be like a really rewarding experience, but like you said, it's like really hard, especially like the way that you did it, like initially. I can imagine, like, because I had my own like hiccups and struggles just doing like an interview show like this initially,
getting people to say yes, and
like booking people, just getting a good workflow set, so I'm not like frantically kind of scrambling for an interview because I'm posting every single week. It's like, no, let me like really like hustle and like do a bunch of interviews in 1 week and just kind of like build out the calendar and have some runway, but then like controlling quality, because it's like, okay, I've always really done most of the interviews through Skype, so it can be hard to control audio quality, or if it's just like, okay, internet's crapping out and then it just cuts off in the middle, then I have to redo the whole thing or something. But I mean, I think it is one of those things that I know a lot of people are intrigued about doing and figuring out how they might do it for like their organization or just personally. And I think in that way, it's like, do it whatever way is like sustainable or meaningful for you. Like there's not any one way that you have to do it. And especially if you do kind of like little, like, because I think that how you've always done advancement, like you kind of did like parcels of seasons.
Yes.
Because I think that's like, if you feel beholden, where it's like, I gotta post every single week, like I gotta do it. It's like, you don't have to do anything, like do it in a way, because like it's gonna come through if you're like fatigued or like not into it, which I know for myself, it's like I feel like like last calendar year, I was doing it every week, and I was like, oh man, I'm like, it's getting to be like a chore. And it's like, I don't want it to be a chore. I want to do it, and I want it to feel like enjoyable, So
Whereas the day after graduating podcast for Longwood, the season, made sense for us because we would have the production challenges would take us a semester, to really gather the tape and to edit the tape and create interesting episodes. And so we would work in the fall semester and really publish, 10 episodes one week after the next up until around graduation. But the Advancement Legends podcast, it was really, and I was doing them season 1, I did 24 shows. And I was like, wow, that was a lot, And then it was also, for me, it was about finding sponsors because I was getting some production help and there were some costs. I felt like that was also not the easiest thing in the world to get, sponsorship help to cover some of the production costs. And so there's that too. You have to be willing to go to bat to get some business arrangements in place too.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I would never recommend anybody to make like a huge investment just like purely out of pocket. And like, thankfully for me, like I sort of have like side project income from like writing that I do for different sites. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to channel that like writing money that I make into like, do I need to buy a software or a new mic or something like that? But, because yeah, it's like if you want, like you can do a podcast really cheaply and all that, but the more that you invest in it, the better it's going to be and all that. So it's like, yeah, if you want to do it kind of bare bones, go for it. You can get it out into the world and just start doing your thing. But yeah, it's like a tall order to just be like, yeah, start like, just throwing like a couple $100 and then perpetually kind of have to keep like hosting it or like doing whatever. So, yeah, I think that's great that I know like for Advancement Legends, you're able to get sponsors. And when I work for the Student Affairs Collective podcast, they had sponsors kind of coming in and out and stuff too, which I think it's interesting within like the higher ed space. Cause it's, it could be also like, yeah, doing like an advancement podcast, it's like a niche within a niche. So it's like trying to just build maybe like a good relationship with an organization or something that, they'd feel comfortable, helping to sponsor and stuff like that. So it's definitely interesting. Yeah. Like within the space, figuring out how kind of the economics work. But I guess, I don't know if maybe, you mentioned, yeah, like kind of getting into podcasting and if that's something that you still like listening to a lot of shows, like you kind of like geek out about, but that's always like to hear if it's like stuff that's maybe inspiring your professional work or just like purely like the personal stuff that you do for fun, bringing in kind of like the geeky aspect, like what's grabbing your attention right now, what are you geeking out about? And if it's like stuff you've always been into that you always go back to or stuff that you've like more recently discovered or anything like that, I guess, yeah, I don't know what comes to mind for you.
Yeah. So I definitely still geek out over podcasts. There's no doubt about that. I would say what is in geek and out of geek for me definitely changes from time to time. And I think like for most of us, that's the case. I still really enjoy Snap Judgment as one of my favorite podcasts, story-based podcasts out there. I try to not listen to as much politics as I once was because it was driving me crazy. So I sort of listen to David Axelrod's podcast, the Axe Files from time to time, but I try to keep things as light as I can. Shifted gears, I've been listening to a lot more music lately, and I've actually started playing the guitar. So I've never really made it past the frustration phase when it comes to musical instruments. When I was a kid, and I tried multiple instruments, and now I just have the time at night. My kids are a little older now, and they're not quite as needy. So I picked up guitar first and bought an electric guitar, and I go out and to sort of the garage, and I sort of hack away and try to make incremental progress on getting a little bit better. There's no pressure on me to do it. So
right.
That's one thing. And I still really enjoy live music. I'm a big fan of sort of classic rock and Fish and the Grateful Dead. And I've been actually going back and listening to a lot of Grateful Dead as I've been trying to listen to the different phases of the band over the years and sort of decipher their different iterations and how they sounded. And so, life's good, I got to admit.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, because I think that's like, I don't know what, I guess right now it's sort of like I'm getting in with like little like short courses on stuff like esports or something, like that idea of like lifelong learning, it can take so many forms. It could be like just purely personal and just like, yeah, like messing around on an instrument and just like seeing that progression and that being really, really meaningful. And then for me, it's like, yeah, I just am interested in esports. I just love, like, it's, it's coming up at colleges and they're having their own scenes, and just like as an industry, I've gotten into it more so lately. But yeah, I mean, it's just like those things that are just like simple pleasures and just purely for yourself. I think they have a lot of value, because I know like sometimes, there are places for people to like build community in, like, esports right now, and like stuff with Twitch. It's like, that's a huge thing. So like I've been watching that a bit more, and it is really cool just to like almost like in a meta sense, like watch how people watch Twitch and like engage in that and stuff like that. But even then, it's just like, yeah, if you're just like going out in your garage and playing guitar, it's like, that's really cool too. Because I mean, like, I can't play an instrument, so I'm very like,
oh man,
I'm like,
and to be clear, I am not good, but you just try to learn some of the fundamentals, the open chords, and just sort of make incremental progress over time. And I find it to be really rewarding. I was going to bed, sitting there watching cable news night after night, and I'm just like, there's got to be a better life here. And so I sort of switch gears, and it's been really helpful. I got a couple of kids too, right? So admittedly, my hobbies are often their hobbies. My son plays soccer and swims and plays basketball, and my daughter dances, and they're still pretty little, 7 and 5. But a lot of my spare time, like last night, we were at a swim meet for like 5 hours. So a lot of my spare time ends up doing what their hobbies are.
Yeah, well, it's good that you can be there, because I know that's always always important. Well, I guess too, yeah. I mean, that's a good point of just like when you do find that time, like of playing guitar, and I'm sure maybe, I don't know if you're like watching a video on how to do something or whatever, but like for the most part, it sounds like it's just like a very good way to like unplug, like it has value in that sense, but then value in the sense of like progression and learning something new and all that. But like, yeah, like we can all kind of fall into that like gravitational pull of like, but yeah, it's like, cable news, it's like, they're just like talking about the same thing, like ad nauseum, and you're just sort of like, getting caught in like a circular loop of logic, I guess. But, yeah, that's awesome. I know, like, it's starting to get that way, which I can only imagine, like, whenever I have kids, like, just getting used to that time adjustment. But just, yeah, like, not feeling like I ever have enough time for everything. So it's like, oh, I always, like, I want to play this video game, I want to, like, watch this thing or whatever. So it's like, yeah, finding and making time for yourself in the time that you have it.
Well, there's definitely a period there when your kids are really young where you don't get that, right? and now that, they're pretty much more self-sufficient and autonomous on some things like going to bed and brushing teeth and taking showers, right? Like there's just the exhaustion level is much lower than they were when they were little kids. So I've got the time to give back to myself, and it's been kind of nice. And the guitar is one of the ways I've been trying to sort of better myself. And as you say, lifelong learning.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, I guess then really quick, is there anything else, again, sort of the idea, maybe like classics for you or stuff that you are literally like just like reading, watching, or listening to right now? We'll definitely include the podcast that you mentioned stuff, but anything else that comes to mind that's like something that you would want to make sure that people go check out?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've got a few favorite books. I've read them a couple of times that people should absolutely check out. I'm a fan of sort of sick, sadistic serial killer stories. And there was this show, they made it was on TNT, like a 10-episode show called The Alienist. Mm-hmm. It takes place in late 19th century New York City in the tenement slums of New York. And it's sort of a serial killer who's killing little young boy prostitutes, and it is the search for this killer. And this is before modern forensics. So fingerprinting is just getting started. And even just the notion of getting into the psychiatry of a serial killer of those days and tracking this person down was a really enthralling read. And you really, when you read the book, it's by Caleb Carr, The Alienist. It takes you really almost feel yourself in New York in those days. And it's a wonderful read. And he has a couple of good books. The Angel of Darkness is another one sort of same characters. And what I also like about it is they have real characters from history in the book. So there's fake characters, and like Teddy Roosevelt, when he's police commissioner, is a character, and of the Vanderbilts and some of these other sort of rich historical folks are in it. So I would certainly recommend that one. I don't know if there's anyone out there who's listening to this who has never seen Fish live. I highly recommend them. They've been playing for 30 years and they sound as good as they've ever sounded. And a lot of people don't like the band because of the sort of lengthy improvisation between songs or extending their songs from the studio sounds. But I think once you take a crack at hearing them live, you kind of understand what the fuss is about. And they're about to go on their summer tour. So I've got a couple of shows lined up, and that's something I enjoy doing as well. Another band that I've been listening to a lot, it's more modern rock, is Tame Impala, which is an Aussie band that has much more sounds like a mixture of the Beatles and there's a little Floyd in there, but they're a much more modern sound. But largely, I got to say, Dustin, when I'm reading and writing, it's almost mostly for my work, I read a lot of content from Case and Higher Ed Live, and as much content as I can absorb around higher ed. And there's so many challenges facing higher ed writ large coming up in the future that I try to stay on top of it and sort of understand what the challenges are.
Yeah. I think that it's like, at least just good advice of like a reading diet is almost just like, there's a lot of, there's a lot going on. There's a lot to read, but it's important to not because I think that's the thing, even like just generally with news and politics or whatever, is like, on one hand, it's like, I would, honor that it's like, oh, it's really stressful and bums people out or whatever. But it's like, but you can't just put your head in the sand and just completely ignore things. Like, especially, higher ed has a lot of things that it needs to grapple with. So it's really helpful to not just ignore everything. It's try to keep aware and keep engaged with all the news and the content and all that, because you'll maybe start to see oh, these are trends that are developing, or I'm seeing a pattern here, or oh, that's a really neat idea of how to address these challenges so that, this future that may be impending, we could sort of mitigate or, try to get ahead of, or just be, more adaptive or something. But,
I find myself most interested in sort of the area that connects engagement communications with what we refer to as alumni relations. I think the term alumni relations is woefully outdated, and there are lots more stakeholders involved when we're thinking about communication strategies and what the goals are. And you look at a Facebook post, just an everyday Facebook, maybe it's a sponsored Facebook post, and there's so much going on there, right? You've got a campaign strategy for the promotional component of it, a content strategy, so you're driving traffic back to your website. So what's there on your website? You've got comments, likes, shares that you're trying to track at the individual level, and how do you track them, and how often do you track them? And there's this sort of notion that there's some sort of difference between this thing we refer to as alumni relations, and largely what we're referring to is reunions or chapters or sort of lifelong learning events with professors speaking. And what is alumni relations? Sure, that still is good stuff, and is really sort of where we're entrenched as an industry. But thinking about engagement strategy as a communication strategist is really how I approach the job, and not just alumni relations, but career services as well. So how are you using your digital tools to get the word out to students? What are the central narratives that they need to know about how to get a job or an internship? And what's the overlap between alumni engagement strategy when it comes to sort of the career narratives and the narratives around traditions and nostalgia and things like that? So I definitely try to stay current in the space, and I'm always interested when people want to talk about that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Because all that stuff, it's like you said, it's the things that people would assume, what alumni relations is. It's yes, and it's a lot of other stuff. It's that bare minimum plus everything else. And then, just seeing good examples of what other people are doing. And like, because I think that's also what's beautiful about higher ed is like people are very open with sharing a lot of the time, like with going to conferences or just like doing a write-up or just doing those sort of things. It's like, yeah, you can be inspired by, keeping well read of what people are working on. And again, just like studies and trends and that kind of stuff. But well, I guess then that kind of helps us, kind of to wrap up here. And then the optimistic note that I always like to end on is like anything or things that you are looking forward to in your job, life, and or the world. So if it's upcoming conference or, something really exciting happening at Longwood or just, personal milestone, anything that comes to mind, something that you are looking forward to.
Well, thanks. Let's see. I'm on the faculty of the Alumni Engagement Strategies Conference coming up in November. That's in Atlanta, the week before Thanksgiving. So if any engagement folks out there, that I'll be there in November, and that's always a great conference. Personally, Longwood we've now 4 years into the job at Longwood. We've gone through some period of really transformational change. And now we're in this period of kind of refinement, right? Season 3 of a podcast, sort of the fourth year of our micro volunteering program, our fourth crack at our revised alumni weekend program, so it's, instead of sort of constantly innovating, now it's a period of trying to make the things that we're doing better. And I really look forward to some more of the strategic thinking that we can put into doing those things professionally. I guess personally, there's some fun things coming up, a couple of fun vacations, one to Lake Tahoe with the family. First time the kids are going to get on an airplane. My dad has retired to Hilton Head, South Carolina. If you've ever been down to Hilton Head, South Carolina, it's a really great place. And so you got the summer months ahead here where the fury of the May sequence of graduation, of an alumni board meeting, of alumni weekend sort of has drawn to a close for another year. And there's a period of regrouping here over the summer as we look to the fall. And I always enjoy that.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. All good stuff. And I know, like I've been kind of like away from conferences for a while, like going properly. Like sometimes, people are, I'm here in Baltimore. So if people are here for a like I sort of try to engage and kind of meet up and stuff like that. But I think also in November, there's like an online learning conference that I want to go to. So I feel like that'll be like the first real proper conference experience in a while. But because I know, yes, it's like I think for right now, it's probably like I haven't found that like conference home yet. So like I'm hoping that maybe this would be the one where it's like, oh, I want to go like every single year and like those sort of things. But and then just like summer being a good time to like recalibrate and refine and refresh and have quality time with family and friends and take some good trips and stuff. So all good stuff. And
I should say I'm also serving on the iModules corporate advisory board, which I've never been on a board of a company before, and they've got their conference called the Sizzler, which is in Orlando, and so it includes some like behind the scenes Disney touring type of things with events, and so I'm kind of looking forward to that too.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I've ever done like that is like I was on the board of like a small nonprofit in Maine when I was working there. I was doing like sustainability work and stuff. But that's awesome. I mean, just now, we're about to wrap up, but I'm also like curious. A follow-up question: like, how did that sort of happen? Is it because of maybe like your university connection, or like I don't know, like how that came to be? Because I mean that sounds amazing, just to be able to provide insight and input and help an organization grow, and then just have opportunities like cool stuff to do, but how did that come to be?
Well, I was connected with iModules is because they were a corporate sponsor for Advancement Live for a couple of years. And so they, we always was sort of working with them as far as topics that they may be interested in seeing us cover. And I got to know some of the folks on the staff a little bit there. And I think it's just I because my role at Longwood with a merged alumni career team and sort of my background is a non-traditional one for someone who's leading an alumni career team. coming up through the digital space, where I've had the chance to use iModules to actually integrate iModules when I was at the University of Virginia. And just, being someone who publishes content, right? They think they knew of me and thought that I could provide sort of a different sort of vantage point because of the size of the schools that I've worked at and also my professional trajectory in using the technology. So sort of a confluence of things, but I was certainly eager to have the chance to converse with the other higher ed folks who serve on the board.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, just like, just have, I guess if that is like the makeup of the board, if it's like a lot of higher ed people from different organizations, backgrounds, institutions, what have you. But and the idea too, like obviously if you're interacting with them, it wasn't just like, oh, I hope I can get on their board someday. I'm gonna try. But it's like it presented itself, and it's like, yes, yeah, that sounds amazing.
Of course, I'll help you. Yeah.
Like, and it's just like a genuine sort of professional relationship that's like grown and blossomed to like this point that, it just makes me think of like some people that I know that like work at other organizations where I'd be like, man, yeah, I mean, if they asked me, I would love to help them. Like, I'm always happy to help them in any way that I can. So. They've always been nice to me, and they add sort of a positive presence to the space. They're trying to innovate, and certainly that's a fun thing to be looking forward to over the next 2 years. Yeah, very cool. Well, great. I appreciate you sharing all that you did and making some time for the podcast here. And just good talking to you. And we'll have everything that we talked about down the show notes to connect with and ways to connect with Ryan as well. But yeah, thanks again, and just have a good rest of your day and good weekend coming up here.
Thanks, Dustin, for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
This podcast is part of the ConnectEDU Podcast Network, bringing together diverse voices in the higher ed community. Check us out on Twitter at ConnectEDUPod or at connectedu.network. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast.